March 4th, 2024. Millions of developers, writers, and researchers open their laptops and run the same test. They paste in the same problem, hit enter on two different websites, and compare what comes back. On one side, ChatGPT, the product that had single-handedly started the AI revolution, backed by Microsoft, worth over $80 billion, downloaded by 100 million people faster than any app in history. On the other side, something new. A system called Claude 3 Opus, built by a company most people had barely heard of. The results come back. Claude wins. Not by a little. Across graduate-level reasoning, coding accuracy, and reading comprehension, the leaderboard flips. For the first time since ChatGPT launched and broke the internet in November 2022, it is not sitting at the top. The strange part is that the people who built Claude used to work inside the building that built ChatGPT. They had the same research papers, the same coffee. Then one day, they walked out, not because they lost, but because they disagreed. And that argument, buried inside a quiet office in San Francisco 3 years earlier, is exactly what set all of this in motion. The argument started quietly, long before anyone outside the labs knew there even was a race. Inside OpenAI, a senior research leader and a small circle of colleagues became increasingly uneasy about the direction of travel. Bigger models, faster releases, more pressure to ship, and a future where a few private companies might end up regulating themselves. They weren't saying progress should stop. They were saying the order mattered: safety, governance, and reliability first, then scale. By late 2020 into 2021, that disagreement hardened into a split. The group left and started a new company, Anthropic. It was a brutal trade. They gave up momentum, access, and the halo of being the team everyone already knew. In exchange, they got control of the one thing they couldn't negotiate for inside a faster-moving machine: the right to build on their own terms. At first, it didn't look like a threat at all. Outside the AI bubble, almost nobody could name Anthropic, and almost nobody cared. But inside the industry, the departure landed like a warning bell. If people close to the center were willing to walk away, then the stakes were bigger than a product launch. And that's where the real setup begins. Because once Anthropic existed, it had only one way to matter. It couldn't simply copy what OpenAI was doing and hope to win on speed. It needed a different advantage. Something that would feel invisible at first, then suddenly obvious, the moment the world started comparing outputs side by side. That advantage turned out to be memory. When ChatGPT launched to the public, it felt like magic, but it had a massive, hidden flaw. If you pasted a 20-page document into the chat, the system would start forgetting the beginning before it finished reading the end. It was incredibly smart, but its short-term memory was fragile. In technical terms, it had a very small context window. While OpenAI was racing to handle hundreds of millions of new users, Anthropic's engineers quietly focused on stretching that window until it broke records. In mid-2023, they gave Claude the ability to read and remember 100,000 tokens at once, roughly the length of a medium-sized novel. A few months later, they pushed it to 200,000. Suddenly, lawyers didn't have to break contracts into tiny pieces. They could drop the whole file in at once. Programmers didn't have to copy individual snippets of code. They could upload entire software libraries. Claude wasn't just chatting anymore. It was absorbing entire archives of data without losing the plot. It was a quiet shift, but it completely changed the math for professional users. They started migrating away from the famous brand name, moving toward the tool that could actually handle their heavy lifting. But having a massive memory was still only half the puzzle. Because even if an AI could read a whole book in seconds, the way users interacted with it was still painfully clunky. It was still just text in a box. To actually win the war, Claude had to break out of the chat window entirely. The first major step came in June 2024 with a new class of tools that turned the static text window into a live workspace. Anthropic quietly introduced deep integrations that let Claude not only read vast documents, but also build, edit, and run things directly in the same environment where people were already working. Programmers no longer had to copy code into another editor and pray it worked. The AI could generate, test, and tweak inside the same session. Designers could ask for layouts, see them rendered, and keep iterating without switching apps. These tools quietly changed user behavior. The shift wasn't just about raw speed or accuracy, but about reducing friction. Every time the user didn't have to switch windows, copy text, or re-explain context, the system gained a tiny edge. Over weeks and months, those tiny edges added up into a new kind of habit. Users started opening Claude first, not as a last resort, but as the default place where work began. The box wasn't just a place to ask questions anymore. It became a command center where you could issue a task, watch it unfold, and move on. Suddenly, the competition wasn't just about who answered better. It was about who got out of the user's way. And once Claude learned how to sit silently in the background, handling the repetitive steps, that was the moment the real work truly began. Because the next move wouldn't just extend the window, it would quietly erase the window entirely and move Claude into the rest of the screen and the rest of the user's life. The first crack appeared quietly in October 2025. Anthropic introduced something called agent skills, modular building blocks you could attach directly to Claude, teaching it your preferences, your file formats, your brand rules once. After that, every conversation picked up exactly where the last one left off. It was a small change on paper. In practice, it felt like the difference between a temp worker and someone who had been on your team for years. But Anthropic was only getting started. On January 12, 2026, they unveiled something called Claude Cowork, and the rules of the game changed completely. This wasn't a chat interface with a bigger brain. You gave Claude access to a folder on your computer, walked away, and came back to find the work done. It reorganized scattered files, pulled numbers buried inside screenshots, turned them into clean spreadsheets, and drafted full reports from a pile of loose notes, all without a single prompt typed. When you had something to add, you didn't interrupt it. You left a message, like a note on a colleague's desk, and Claude handled it between tasks. Then, on January 30th, 2026, just 18 days later, Anthropic dropped another update that almost nobody outside the industry saw coming. Plugin support built directly into Cowork. 11 open-source plugins shipped at once. One for finance, analyzing spreadsheets and building models. One for legal, reviewing contracts and flagging compliance risks. One for sales, researching prospects and tracking deals. One for marketing, customer support, product management, and even one for biology research. You could also build your own from scratch and share it across an entire organization overnight. In the space of 1 month, Claude has gone from a very smart chatbox to a configurable digital employee with a different job title for every department in the building. ChatGPT invented the category, but Claude has quietly taken over the office.